Hello and welcome to another interview on Silver Sages Sharing Stories. I'm speaking today with Robin McConchie. Robin and I first met in Kathmandu in 1977, and we were facing 3 months of travelling from Kathmandu to London. We were young, fairly naive, very excited young travellers heading off on a journey of a lifetime. I used to love sometimes on those long days sitting and talking to Robin because of her questioning nature and her perspective about all sorts of things, life, where we were passing through, politics, just any number of things. And I found that quite fascinating. Over the years, our lives have kind of come and gone. We run into one another at reunions, and then since we've both been in Brisbane and she's retired, we've seen a little more of one another, which is lovely. But it says a lot about Robin's modest nature that I've only known vague details about her career until I started researching her for this interview. So Robin, you're probably blushing now as I tell people that you started off as an ag teacher, then you joined the ABC Rural Department in 1982, became a reporter, then the chief rural political correspondent in Canberra. And I don't know if I've ever told you, but one day I was knee-deep in children and boring house things, and I turned on the press club and you were asking questions, and I looked and went, well, she's done things with her life all right. I was very impressed. Then she became the executive producer of the Queensland ABC Radio Country Hour. And this is something I certainly didn't hear from you. In 2011, the Rural Press Club of Queensland inducted Robin into the Hall of Fame as a living treasure. Now, I've always known you were a living treasure, but now we know it publicly. So I'm sorry to embarrass you at the beginning of the introduction, but let's just have a chat now. Robin, I'd love you to tell people just about a few of the why you went from ag teacher to reporter, first of all, and then some of the highlights of your career in Canberra.
When I studied ag science at Melbourne University, they did what are people going to be doing in 20 years' time? And I was noted for the fact that I always asked questions in lectures, and they said, you've got to be a journalist, you're going to be on radio, you're going to be on TV, or whatever. And I know I've got a good face for radio, so I never made TV. But it's an inquisitive mind, and I think that when I finished ag science at Melbourne University, there were, in fact, in the middle of an appalling drought. People will remember it, 1976. Farmers were shooting sheep, shooting cattle. They were being paid to actually shoot cattle because they got more money for them by shooting them than they did taking them to the sale yards and basically them going to the abattoir. So when I finished ag science, there was actually no opportunity to get a job in agriculture. Not one person in my year got a job.
Wow.
So I did a DPED, I did a Diploma of Education, thinking this was going to be my entree to the world. I'd be able to get a job anywhere in the world, which really didn't happen. So I studied teaching and did and subsequently my first job was as a student teacher at Echuca Tech. Or my first job was at Echuca Technical College, and I taught wool classing, and my claim to fame with wool classing is that I remember coming into the class one day and not being able to find one of my students, and one of the other children had bailed him. So that was a really good start for me. But the other thing that I did at that school, and I think...
Hang on, bailed him? You mean...
In a wool bale.
In a wool bale? That's what I thought.
And nearly pressed him.
That's a great start, yeah.
That was a great start. And another thing I did at that school is I ran a world baked bean eating competition, the Guinness Book of Records, and it was a fundraiser for the school, and it was a real highlight because it really engaged the students. And I wrote to some of the baked bean producing companies, and my entire office was full of tins of baked beans. They all gave very generously. And I don't know if you've ever eaten baked beans one at a time with a toothpick, but you can't really eat that many in 20 minutes. So even after the competition, my study was completely full of tins of baked beans. And the beauty of it was that the kids became really engaged in this competition. It was really fun. Most of the other teachers thought I was nuts. But the student, and they were all sponsored. And for the local disabled school, we were able to purchase a wheelchair. And for every dollar my students raised, we managed to get $5 subsidy from the government. So they raised about $400, and we got close to $2,000 that we were able to buy a wheelchair. And the students were really engaged in the opportunity. The other thing that I was very proud of at that school is that my ag students weren't academically the best. And I ran a work experience program for these kids. And every single one of my students who did the work experience program got an apprenticeship and a job. And there is no that way they would have passed year 12 and gone on to university in the middle of a drought. But every single one of them got a job. And I to this day, I think that's the thing that I'm most proud of, is that I was able to enable young people to forge a career. And I think that's happened through my time as a rural reporter. I've really enjoyed engaging with young people to assist them to develop their career.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I won't even go there asking you questions about all the baked beans, but maybe off camera we might have
a lot of farting. I think we added to the methane production in Australia. Probably contributed a lot to greenhouse gas emissions. But after uni, I did ag science. I taught at Echuca Tech. I went overseas with you, and that was an experience of a lifetime. And 3 months on a bus. I think we swore we'd never ever go on a bus again.
I don't think I've ever gone on a bus again. However, for those who are listening and watching this interview, we're coming up for a 45-year reunion fairly soon, and I think that's pretty amazing that we've managed to.
I think the amazing thing about that is that at our 40th reunion, how many of us turned up? There are about 20 people turned up out of 35 on the bus, 40 years on. And so it just says what an incredible experience it was.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very bonding. So how did you then make the move into being a reporter?
Well, when I came back from England, I was there for close to 3 years. I actually got a job teaching at Geelong Grammar as an ag science teacher, and they actually needed a female ag science teacher, and so I taught agriculture there. And I remember I had my students, all of whom were year 11, year 12, quite a number of them were in the first basketball team at Geelong Grammar, and they were supposed to be doing a project when they got to the Melbourne show. We went to the Royal Melbourne show, which is a big event. And I was wandering around in the freezing cold in the middle of the Melbourne show exhibition. I couldn't see any of my students. I bumped into a friend of mine and I said, "What do you do?" And she says, "I'm a rural reporter." And I said, "What's that like?" And she said, "Dead set, it is absolutely the ideal job for you, Rob. You're interested in people, you're inquisitive, you want to know what's going on in the world. It's a perfect job for you." So subsequently, I left Geelong Grammar and I taught at another girls' school in Melbourne called Tintern. And then I saw an ad for a job as a rural reporter and applied for it and got a traineeship from Melbourne, which took me first of all to Adelaide. Then I went to Queensland, went back to Adelaide, went to Canberra, as you mentioned. And I really enjoyed my time in Canberra. I really enjoyed politics. And I was a director of the National Press Club for a number of years, for about 10 years, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I remember sitting next to the Dalai Lama, to the President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, some of the most boring speakers, some of the absolutely best speakers, it was a fabulous opportunity. And the reason I got onto the committee is a friend of mine who worked in the gallery, in the press gallery, really felt that they needed a regional voice on the National Press Club. They wanted to hear a rural voice on the National Press Club board. And somehow or other they managed to do a gerrymander and I was elected, and I was there for about 10 years. It was great. And so at that time I was working in the press gallery in Canberra and filing for rural programs all over Australia. But I think I loved it. I was there when the wool reserve price scheme collapsed. When I've even got my little badge of when President Bush came out to Australia, and was a guest of the Australian Parliament back in 1991, and it was an exciting time. I enjoyed talking to the politician. I enjoyed the politics. I enjoyed. Finding out the latest science from the CSIRO.
Mm-hmm.
It was an exciting time. I was on the board of the CSIRO Division of Entomology on their Community Liaison Committee, and that was fabulously exciting. It was really felt like you were, at the centre of Australian politics. After about 10 years, I got bored witless with it. I was sick of it. And I was offered a job in Queensland and came here and have enjoyed it ever since.
Excellent, excellent. Good move, good move. Was the job that you came here for to Queensland, was that as an executive producer or was it as a reporter?
No, it was an executive producer. And I think you may have heard of the Peter Principle, where everyone rises to their own level of incompetence. And yes, I think I reached
that. Again.
But I think I was a better reporter than I was as a leader of a team. I enjoyed working with the reporters individually.
Yes.
I found it difficult managing them as a group.
Yeah.
Because I think we've all seen this with COVID, how much better communication you get with someone you're talking to than when you're actually talking to them face to face.
Yes.
Like you and I are talking now. 70% of our communication is through our body language, 20% the tone of our voice, and 10% by the language that we use. Yeah. So I found it very difficult managing reporters remotely because I really didn't know what was going on, what was happening. But I really did love the reporters. I loved the job I was doing, leading the team in Queensland and producing the Daily Country Hour, fostering new blood, being really tough on them, demanding of them, and seeing them blossom. I just loved them seeing the reporters go from, sort of like fish fingerlings into giant salmon who were able to take on the world and bring us some of the best stories that we see, whether it's on Radio Current Affairs or on Landline or on the ABC radio itself.
Yeah. You've always enjoyed shining the light on other people and fostering, and that's wonderful. And we'll be coming to that in a minute, because I want to ask you, first of all, just about how hard did you find it to actually stop and retire?
It was terribly hard to retire. I absolutely loved being a rural reporter. I loved walking into a conference and learning something new. I loved going out to farms and engaging with farmers. I loved seeing the program come together and really nailing one of those politicians, really nailing a story. So it was very difficult to leave from all those aspects, but I think probably from a mental health point of view, it was probably not a bad idea.
Yeah, and it was time, that's right. So you've since then been involved a lot with the Queensland rural, now what is it, rural, remote, regional.
No, it's Queensland Rural, Regional and Remote Women's Network.
Thank you.
And it was started by a friend of mine who currently is the president of AgForce back in the early 90s. It's got a really interesting genesis. It was started by a dairy farmer, a woman called Jan Darlington, and a rural reporter. It was started back in the early 90s by a woman called Jan Darlington. And at that time, the ABS, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, didn't classify women as farmers. Basically, women farmers could not get loans from the bank. Wow. Women farmers were not recognised as farmers. Women were second-rate citizens, essentially, even though they were doing amazing things. And she really wanted to skill up women, provide them with leadership, provide them with training and inspire them. It wasn't a lobby group to set up, it wasn't a lobby group, but that was the circumstances. Women were working, 40, 60, 80 hours a week on dairy farms, but their role as farmers was not recognised, officially not recognised. And at around that time, there was a general feeling, you know, it was the year of women, International Year of Women. There were, you know, women's farm groups developing around the countryside. Kathy, I'll think of her name, but the independent politician in federal politics, Kathy McGowan, founded the Australian Women in Agriculture. It was really an active movement, and this movement set up then. And so, and I knew Jan Darlington, a formidable woman in Monto, dairy farmer. I knew a woman called Georgie Somerset, who's currently the president of AgForce and also on the board of the ABC. So I'd had interaction with them over many, many years, and I decided when I was going to leave the ABC, my aim was to tour around Queensland in my new four-wheel drive with my dog and visit people that I'd had so much contact with but not time enough to speak to around Queensland. That was sort of my goal, and I wanted to join a network and work with people. And so that's why I joined the Queensland Rural Women's Network. And I think it's like many organisations, it's got its challenges. But one of the things that I do for that organisation is that I do a little monthly podcast for them, which I really enjoy doing. And it's evolving, I think, like you, Jen. I think you have to learn enough technically to do these podcasts. So you're constantly challenging yourself. You're learning about people. You're learning about their stories, but you're not letting your brain, freeze in retirement.
Yeah. I've listened to some of the interviews and I've found them really fascinating. I'm going to put a link to them with your permission with this story, because I think it would be wonderful for other people to listen to them. Fascinating interviews with really interesting women from the country doing all sorts of things.
Well, I'm thinking about evolving it a little bit. If you go into the world of podcasting, which many of us have gone through in COVID, there are so many different groups, you know, recording interviews, podcasting them. And I think you need to find a niche. And I've called mine Bush Business, is really what I want to call it. And I'm actually thinking of changing my little bit and focusing on more on seniors and what they've done, because I think there are a lot of active podcasts going about how you set up your business, how you make it work, and progressing on from there. But a little bit like the Cattlemen in Pearls. I mean, it really celebrated the lives of cattle women across Queensland. Beautifully written, fabulously put together.
Mm-hmm.
But I want the opportunity to, when I'm driving around Queensland, is just to listen to a little podcast about some of the stories, about some of the fabulous women, the stories that aren't told by the newspapers, that aren't told by the TV, but just ordinary people who've been living and working and taken on the challenges in rural Queensland.
So when you launch your interviews as Bush Business, let me know and I'll make sure that the link is there for that as well. For now, I'll put it to the Harvey SoundCloud podcast, so people can go on there and listen to those. So you've been doing some wonderful things. I know you've also embraced a traditional retirement where you're loving your gardening, perhaps getting exhausted with your gardening, loving your dog Harvey, and also doing a bit of diving.
Yes, I've always loved scuba diving. I started off scuba diving back in when I was teaching at Geelong Grammar, actually, and really took it up when I first moved to Queensland back in the early 80s. Had a big pause when I didn't dive, but I love the feeling of being in the water with animals and just being an observer and a photographer. It's a very special feeling. It's not a feeling of weightlessness at all. I mean, it's not about floating around in space, but it's being a three-dimensional part of an ecosystem that is endlessly fascinating, endlessly challenging. I mean, and tragic too. I mean, I went diving in the Solomon Islands a few years ago, just after I retired, on this beautiful little island called Yupi. And it was magical. There were so many different dives. A couple of years later, after a really bad case of coral bleaching, I really felt like I was swimming through Aleppo. I felt like I was swimming through a bomb site. It was tragic. I mean, what we've done to the environment is with
Frightening.
is absolutely frightening. But on the other hand, I went diving over at Stradbroke Island in March, just as the COVID pandemic was starting to take grip of us. And I did one of the most beautiful dives I have ever done over on Stradbroke Island. I have never dived with such quiet, gentle manta rays, huge manta rays.
Beautiful.
There were so many sharks. I have never seen so many sharks lying on top of each other.
Yeah, you were always more adventurous than me, Rob.
It was magical. So what I'm really saying here is there is nothing wrong with holidaying in your own backyard. We have some of the barrier reef might be stuffed, but we've got Stradbroke Island. If you go down to Seal Rocks in New South Wales.
Morton Island as well?
I've dived north of Morton Island at Flinders Reef. I haven't had really very many good dives there, but Seal Rocks down in New South Wales, some of the best diving I've ever done in my life. So we can holiday in Australia.
Absolutely, and intending to do so. I'm calling this Silver Sages. I know you're not silver yet, but I do know that you're very wise. So is there anything that you would like to share with people, just from career, life, thoughts, some little gems?
If I was talking to young people today, I would make sure you really think seriously about your super. I would make sure that if you have the opportunity to salary sacrifice, you really do get into salary sacrifice. I would think sort of what you're doing, Jen, is about planning for your retirement. It is the biggest challenge. I mean, I haven't had kids, but, it really is a huge challenge. I mean, I used to walk into a room of 200 people, and because I had a microphone, I had every right to go up and talk to anybody in that room and engage with them. You lose your identity when you retire. So you've really got to plan for it. And it's not just about going on holidays, it's about what you want to do. Yeah. I, many years ago, and again, I regret it, but I used to get emails each week or each month about women on boards. If you feel, plan ahead. What is it that I really want to do? I mean, you can play golf, you can go travelling, you can, go and have coffee and network with friends, but you've got to keep your brain intellectually stimulated. There's only so many jigsaws you can do. But you need to work out what it is. And there are plenty of opportunities. I mean, and it's finding those opportunities. Like, I took up golf basically, and I've met a whole new group of people there, and that I enjoy the walk, I enjoy being out in the environment, I enjoy challenging myself. If you hop onto the State Library, if you want to learn photography, I've joined the Brisbane Photographic Group.
Excellent.
And you can go out and you can learn. So you can do things, but it's feeling that your life's not pointless.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got grandkids, I don't. And I think you have to plan for retirement. You really do. Financially, yes, you have to do that. That's obvious. But what are you going to do with yourself? And how are you going to entertain? How are you going to intellectually challenge yourself so that whether it's reading, learning, studying, learning to skydive, which I would never do because I'm afraid of heights. You've got to plan it.
Absolutely. I'm very glad to hear that you are now embracing the photographer that you've always been and starting to really do something with that. Your photographs have always been wonderful. So you're really enjoying having the time to explore that side of yourself?
Yes, I do. But the thing that I really enjoy doing is going along and feeling like a total nerd at a photographic class. And then coming away and just going and exploring your opportunities, just going away. And I think I must be thick because it takes a long time for things to sink in. But the amount I've learned from just going along to a 2-hour photographic group and having the teacher saying a few things and then just letting it go into your head and just experimenting, having a bit of fun, having a bit of focus.
Fabulous. That's wonderful. Robin, it's been an absolute delight speaking with you today, and I look forward to catching up with you very soon.
Good on
Thank
you, Jen.
for being on here. Okay.
Thank you.